is your relationship with time? Are you wired and tired, stressed and overwhelmed, busy and going nowhere? Or just want to scale your business? Welcome to Take Back Time with your host, Penny Zenker. Penny focuses on books, strategies, tools, and tips to help you work smarter and approach your time more strategically. As a result, you can have more energy, focus, and get more done in less time. Be more efficient and effective. Get ready to take back time.
Hello, and welcome to Take Back Time. My name is Penny Zenker, and I'm your host. And today, I'm very curious. And that's what we're going to be talking about, curiosity. And I have with us here today a very special guest, Dr. Diane Hamilton. She's the founder and CEO of Tonera, a consulting and media-based business. And she's also a nationally syndicated radio host, which I was actually on her show. That'll come out sometime. Keynote speaker, former MBA program chair at the Forbes School of Business. She has her PhD in business management, and she's taught more than 1,000 business courses and authored multiple books, including Cracking the Curiosity Code, The Key to Unlocking Human Potential. She's the creator of the Curiosity Code Index Assessment, which is the first and only assessment that determines the factors that inhibit curiosity. Her groundbreaking work in the area of curiosity helps organizations to improve innovation, engagement, and productivity. And her books are required reading in universities around the world. Some of the most respected names in leadership, including Steve Forbes, Keith Croft, Ken Fisher, have endorsed it. And she's highly sought after keynote speaker who shared the stage with top speakers, including Marshall Goldsmith, Martha Stewart, Damon John, Travis Bradbury, Jeffrey Hazlett, and has been featured on Forbes, First for Women, ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox. So I'm so excited. Dr. Diane Hamilton, welcome to the show.
Penny, I'm so excited to be here. I had so much fun when you were on my show.
This is going to be even more fun.
I hope so, but it couldn't be. I don't know.
Well, we're curious, right? So what's the hubbub about curiosity? How did you get so curious about curiosity?
You know, it's so funny because I've always been a really curious kid. I was the why kid that drove the parents crazy, of course. But, you know, I've written other books in the past about personality assessments and reinventing your career and different types of things. And I've always been curious about learning new things, but I hadn't really thought about writing a book about curiosity until a couple of years ago when I started the radio show. And I've interviewed close to maybe 1,000 people in that show since I started it. And everybody I interviewed was just so interesting and the really fascinating, the billionaires and CEOs and successful people, they all kind of had this level of curiosity. They were all avid readers and they knew so many different things. And I started to compare that to, I still teach, I teach for several different universities. So a lot of my students really didn't embrace that same level of curiosity. They kind of wanted you to answer stuff for them instead of that. They wouldn't try to figure it out necessarily on their own. So I started to think, it'd be interesting to write a book about curiosity. But as I was writing the book, I realized there are other books about curiosity, but they just all talk about curiosity. And I wanted to go beyond that. I wanted to fix it if people have had issues with it.
Well, that's the biggest thing is there's a lot of books that tell you this is what's great about this. Well, tell me how to do it, like how to get past myself.
Exactly. And that's what I did. So I thought you can't really do that without creating an assessment to measure where people are and what's stopping them. And there are assessments out there which were interesting to me. I mean, there's big 5 factors of personality and they have openness to experience, for example, or there's other assessments from famous researchers, but they all measure how curious you are on a level, you're super curious or you're not so curious. And I thought, well, that was good to know, but it still doesn't tell me how to fix it. So I created an assessment to determine the 4 factors, as you mentioned, that hold people back from being curious. And I think that is why everybody's focusing in so much on my research right now, because there's just nothing like it. It's really fun because when people are on the show, they all talk about creativity or motivation, all these things. And when I ask them what comes first, curiosity or whatever they're talking about, and they all say curiosity.
Curiosity, absolutely. I love the whole sense of curiosity. And I know that you talk a lot about this because it shifts our behavior, it shifts our performance. Like it makes us more detached. So we're not like so impulsive, emotional about things. I talk about it a lot too. And I think it's really powerful. But what I really love what you talk about is that it's how to get past what's holding us back, because that's the key, right? It's not just understanding how valuable curiosity is. It's how do we tap into it and how do we get past the behaviors where we are? So what are those 4 behaviors so that we can share that with the group and the listeners? What are those 4 behaviors that hold us back from our curiosity?
Well, it was interesting when I started to research this. I thought, well, first, let me just put a thread into LinkedIn to just ask people what held them back. And one of the main things people were coming back with was fear. I wasn't surprised to hear that. Nobody wants to ask the dumb question at the work meeting. So you lean next to Bob and you go, hey, Bob, why don't you ask, you know what I mean? Because you want Bob to look stupid. You don't want to be the stupid one, right? So it's the kind of thing where fear was something I wasn't surprised about, but I knew there was more than just fear. And people were giving me all these different ideas. And I thought, well, I want to create a valid assessment. I hired psychometric statisticians, and then they couldn't even figure out how to do some of this. It was so complicated. And for years, I sent out so many surveys. Thousands of people were studied. And eventually we figured out, well, actually, I did a lot of work with factor analysis and all the statistics to get it perfect, to find out what these 4 things were. And the acronym is FATE, F-A-T-E. So F was fear. Wasn't surprising to me. But A was assumptions, which is really the voice in your head. We assume things. We're not going to like this. This is going to be boring. I've done it in the past. I'm not going to like it again. So my family will make fun of me. You've got all these things in your head that you just tell yourself. And then T was technology. And of course, we over rely on it. And
so that one I was curious about. I would like to hear you talk a little bit more about that. Because I was like, technology, how is that keeping us from being curious? Maybe it adds to our curiosity.
It can. I'll touch on that. I'll just give you the last one is environment. Okay. Our family, friends, and social media, everybody you've ever known in your life, your peers, everybody. So to get to the technology question, that was an interesting one to me too, because I think that a lot of people rely on it too much. You just ask Siri or your Echo or whoever you're dealing with a question, and you don't really think about the foundations behind things anymore because you just want an immediate gratification answer.
So do you mean like where I might ask Siri and then something comes back from the internet, and Abe Lincoln said that everything on the internet was true, right?
You could ask the question that your device, but a lot of times, I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question because you set off Siri.
I seem to be having trouble hearing you.
Oh, that's too funny. Sorry about that.
It's so funny.
So my question is that when we ask that one or the other one, the Google one, that they come back with an answer and that we take it to be true, but there's a lot of non-truth out there as well. So is that what you mean?
It's the Wikipedia world. I have a lot of students who want to cite Wikipedia because they think everything on there is the answer to everything. And it is not actually reliable all the time. I mean, it can be, and a lot of times it is, but it isn't always. And so I think, that's one of the things we teach students in my classes is how to really do critical thinking, to analyze information, to be able to use technology to find peer-reviewed scholarly sources and all that stuff. But not to just go on face value. You have to look at multiple things, you know what I mean? And not just get it from one source.
Right.
And so I think technology is great and I use it to death, but I also want to know the foundation behind it. And I think you can over or underutilize anything. And I think that a lot of people, they'll stay with the same cell phone or the same version or the something because they just learned it and they don't want to learn the next thing, and I think it can be overwhelming to some extent to some people. I mean, I give talks a lot of times about different generations in the workplace. The older generations, they just freak out sometimes if you give them, new technology because either they're afraid they're going to break it, and so they don't even try to figure it out. But crash your computer, I'll tell you, you're going to learn all kinds of things trying to fix it, right?
Yeah, totally. So, from a necessity, right?
Right. So I like that when you try to figure it out. And I think that you want to know the technology, but you want to know why the technology works. You don't want to just take software that can run statistics without knowing what the statistics mean. You know what I mean? There's all these other areas that it can lead to. So technology can be something that a lot of people avoid doing certain things with it or overutilize it.
Okay. Interesting. So, well, there you go. That was a really interesting one that I saw. And so, how do you find when people get this information to find out what's holding them back for their curiosity? What do you find that people are learning most about themselves and how are they applying it?
Well, what's interesting is I kind of thought they would be quite different in the numbers, more fear, less this, more that. And it was pretty even across the four areas. It wasn't exact. I mean, fear was pretty high. Some of them are very high and for some people and not for others. But overall, they weren't that different. I think what it does is it gives people the chance to look at some of these things that they didn't even know were holding them back. And there's 36 questions they take when they take the assessment. And they get immediate report, just like if you took an emotional intelligence test or DISC or MBTI. And what it does is it shows you these 36 responses of how you came out. And it opens up this maybe my family had an impact. Maybe my teachers couldn't answer all the questions. Maybe I tell myself this is too difficult. All these things that you don't even face on a day-to-day basis. Now you've opened up this, maybe I need to look at this. And now that I know this, I can create an action plan, kind of a personal SWOT analysis of how to overcome this. What are my obstacles? How are my threats? And how can I create an action plan that's measurable to move forward?
So that's a good thing, like to talk about how do you measure curiosity? How do I measure the actions that I'm taking to be more curious?
Well, this is the thing. You can measure what's holding you back. Like, you've got your baseline measurement. So now you can determine, okay, so I keep telling myself I'm not interested in certain topics, for example. I can start exploring some of these topics. Maybe I used to not be interested in them. And nobody's saying that you're going to definitely love everything, right? But I think we shut ourselves down from exploring this or that just because in the past it wasn't good. So some of it's baby steps. You go, well, I'm going to try reading this section of the paper today. And normally I would never even look at that section, or I'm going to read a different book about this. And you can reflect back. You can set goals for yourself every month. I'm going to check how many of these different topics did I read this month. You can quantify these things.
Okay.
In a lot of different ways like that.
So it's kind of like training habits of, like you mentioned, it might be the newspaper. So you're not interested, so you don't get into it. So you kind of challenge yourself in different areas to train your brain to open up and be more open and more curious. Is that what I'm understanding?
That's part of it. And with fear, some of it is baby steps. And we train organizations. I certify people to give this CCI. Consultants, for example, can go through this program. And so we train them how to help employees go through their personal action plan to set these goals, not unlike what you do maybe with engagement survey. You find out you're not engaged. What can I do to be more engaged? And you go through all these personal steps. We also have them do another exercise to help leaders for overall organization action plan. So they create actually two action plans, a personal one for all their individual steps. And then consultants find out what's going on within the company. Maybe low engagement, maybe innovation is a problem, maybe people aren't critical thinking, whatever their top issues are. Then in these training sessions, once we've worked on all individual curiosity-based issues, we work on the overall corporate problem. And just like Disney went to their workers in their laundry and asked them, how can we make your job better? Because we're losing all of you and nobody's want to do this job. And they got back simple answers that made them be able to make it better for them. That's the same kind of thing we're doing with this. We're giving back simple suggestions. Here, now I understand about curiosity and what you can do to help me be more curious. This is what it would help me be more curious to help in innovation. This is if you would help me by doing this. So let's say you're giving presentations, maybe allow me to do one on something I really like that I already feel comfortable doing and give suggestions like that. This is what would make me be less fearful. And so a lot of leaders don't even think to go to their employees for the solutions. And they're usually the ones who have some of the best ideas.
Well, let me tell you, they don't go to the employees for solutions. And what I found in my leadership and coaching is that people don't ask their customers either. Like they just don't ask, right? In general, we are not curious enough so that we really collect, it speeds, right? The collection of the best answers and the answers that we're looking for without us trying to figure it out and assume, like you said, that we know the answers. Got to ask.
Well, that I had a guy on my show the other day who the undercover millennial, and he would go into organizations as a consultant and wear a pen that had a camera, and they would hire him to do this. And that, because a lot of these leaders would say, yeah, I've changed my organization. I'm keeping up with everything. And then he'd ask them, well, are you changing the way you lead people? And they'd say, no. And so they all made these assumptions that everything should be the same and that I should lead people the way I've always led them. So he would get out and ask people, and with his camera, you record all this and show the leaders, block out their faces and all that. And they would be saying, oh, it's awful here. The culture is this and that. And they had no idea because they never would do that. And he felt that a lot of people would talk to him because he was a millennial, and millennials felt comfortable talking to other millennials. So there's some information. Sometimes it's harder to get because if,
True.
You're older, you're talking to them, they may shut down a little bit. So you have to find roundabout ways like that sometimes to get feedback. In these training sessions, they're not talking right to the leader. They're talking to the HR or the consultant person in a private way. And all of their feedback would be going back anonymously.
Oh, absolutely. Because then they feel safe to share whatever it is that they really think.
But they really think. It's usually not what leaders think they think either.
So I know we talked about all the benefits. We touched upon that other people are talking about the benefits. I would like to, for the listeners, because this might be like a new topic. I never really thought about curiosity at all. So by changing your behavior around curiosity, how does that affect performance? What kind of areas do you see are increasing in performance and productivity?
Well, I think that a lot of it ties into a few areas. I mean, everything from creativity to emotional intelligence to communication to innovation and engagement. I mean, all of those things definitely, because if you think about...
So all of those things that actually make companies successful.
Right. Okay. Look at it like this. Okay. So you're going to bake a cake. Okay. And you want to mix the ingredients. So you're mixing flour and eggs and water and whatever it is, cake mix for me. And you mix it together, you put it in the oven. What happens? Well, nothing's going to happen if you don't turn on the oven, right? So the ingredients in the workplace are the creativity, innovation, engagement, all those things. We're mixing them together. We know they're important ingredients.
Right.
Nobody's turning on the oven. And the oven is curiosity. So if you don't turn on the oven, you don't get cake. So we need to get cake.
And a bunch of goo.
Right. We just got a bunch of goo out there. So that's the problem that we're seeing. And it definitely ties into a lot of this. And when I talk about emotional intelligence, it's really very near and dear to me just because I wrote my dissertation on it. And if you look at empathy and interpersonal skills and all these things, to really empathize with other people and have good interpersonal communication and interpersonal skills, you have to ask questions, you have to listen, you have to do a lot of these things that require curiosity about the other person.
Absolutely.
And it ties into my research and perception too. All that ties in. Sometimes our perception is our reality and we don't look outside.
Right.
We need to realize that everybody else sees it their way as well. So empathy is one of the hugest things that you can do in terms of building emotional intelligence skills. And yet, if you don't ask questions, if you're not curious, chances are you're not getting that empathy.
I think that the whole idea of basing, because it's a skill that encompasses being curious, right? Encompasses all those things.
Right.
I think it's brilliant because, like you said, it's about making things simple, right?
Yeah.
And we can talk about emotional intelligence. That sounds complex.
Yeah.
Right? There's a lot that goes into that and so forth. But actually, the key to emotional intelligence could be curiosity, right?
I think it's a big part. I had Daniel Goleman on my show, who I studied all of his work for my research and years ago when I did my research originally. And no matter who I talk to from Harvard, I've had Francesca Gino on my show, who wrote a great piece about curiosity for Harvard Business Review. I highly recommend reading that. And all of them, I'm asking, where does this all begin? And they all think it begins there. And I think even drive and motivation. I mean, Daniel Pink's book's great. You read Simon Sinek's Finding Your Why, all those books, Carol Dweck's Mindset. I recommend reading all of those books.
Absolutely.
But it all begins with curiosity. And so that's why I was so stunned that there was no way to measure this in any other way other than how curious you were or not. So that's why it was a good challenge for me. And I loved it, going through all the different kinds of scenarios, trying to figure out how to do this. It really was a lot of fun. And I got to talk to a lot of interesting people about this because consultants really love this because they've given a disc to death. They've given Myers-Briggs. And they're like, I want to be relevant. I mean, this is the time everyone wants to be innovative, right? And if you want to be innovative, you got to ask questions. You got to explore. And some companies are like Kodaks and the Blockbusters are afraid to give up their old model because it worked. But Marshall Goldsmith was right. What got you here won't get you there. And if you're afraid to explore, you're going to end up not relevant anymore. And that's why I think this is so important.
Absolutely. I'm really excited about, you bringing this to corporations and to people, because I think that it'll actually, as we raise the level of emotional intelligence, right, then we improve our relationships, and relationships are everything. And so I want to relate this to, a lot of the entrepreneurs who might be listening here. Is improving those relationships in the organization makes people collaborate better together, makes people, as you said, more innovative. And just thinking about the marketplace with more curiosity than just the me too, here's how I show up in the marketplace, that really opens up that kind of blue ocean thinking about, well, what are we missing in the marketplace? Who are we not capturing? Or what is a different way to look at things? How could we speed things up? How could we offer something different? I think it gets them out of that sort of box, right? To think outside the box, and they can really apply that in so many different areas of their business.
I mean, it's just so important to every group. I just gave a talk, I think it's 50,000 project managers, and that's a huge problem for them to think outside the box, because sometimes they come up with their plans, but they don't get the feedback first. And then they're looking in the same old places trying to fix things. I mean, their whole thing is to have contingency plans. So they have to think in a curious way. But if they're not going out and asking for feedback from different areas, you sometimes find answers from like the strangest places. I wrote about it in my book. There's this hospital in England. They were having like an unusually high number of casualties after transferring patients from the OR to recovery. So they did all their normal ways of contingency plans for how they handled things, and they tried everything, and people were still dying. They were still having problems. So a couple of the leaders were watching a race car event one night, and they watched them take apart the Formula One race car, 7 seconds, put it back together. Everything's perfect.
Right.
Thinking, how can they do that? And we can't just move a patient from here to here kind of thing. So they actually asked them to come and see what they're doing and talk to them to see if they could help it. And they gave them a few suggestions, and they actually improved their efficiency by 50%. So
wow.
You think about how we talk about thinking outside your cubicle, outside your silo, outside your, but this is like outside your organization, outside your industry thinking is what we need to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I get so many different ideas. I love working with people in different industries because you can cross-pollinate, right? Like you said, something that works in another industry brings new ideas, fresh looks and approaches to another. So it's really, really valuable. So let me ask you, what's your definition of productivity?
Well, that's a really interesting question because each organization kind of defines it a little bit differently. Some of it's sales units sold. Some of it's how much money they're saving based on communication-based issues. There are a million different ways that they...
I actually, in an earlier radio show, I asked every single guest, and not a single guest gave me the same answer. So,
right. So I'm on target, right, by saying there's a million different answers.
Absolutely. But what's yours?
To me, it's based on what your job is. Like in sales, if you sold X units last year, then if you sold more units this year, you're more productive, obviously. So it can be bottom line sales in certain industries and certain situations. And a lot of it, the people I deal with are consultants and speakers. And for them, that's how they're measuring their productivity, right? Think that you have to think in terms of bottom line, what your value is to shareholders and stakeholders and everybody that you're dealing with is what's valuable to one person's perception is different. For the salesperson, it's all how many widgets they sold. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so absolutely.
I think it's all based on your perception, which position you're in, how you would define that.
Makes sense. I was thinking that you were going to come from a curiosity perspective, and that the more you implement and embrace curiosity, the more it's going to show up in all of those bottom line areas.
I agree with that, but I don't know if I would say that's the definition of an overall definition.
Right.
I think that people all define it so differently, but I think that no matter how you define it, curiosity will help it. So yes, I agree with that.
Well, just saying it could be like that, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
That's interesting. So have you seen any correlation with personality types? And you had said you had done a number of work and projects around personality types. Have you seen any correlation with personality type and curiosity?
Well, I haven't done any studies as far as comparing for extroverts or introverts versus, and then in the data as far as gender and all that, we haven't got enough data to make it be something I would say. If the women came in a little higher initially, and you know what I mean? So we have some data out there, but since it's just launched this year, I'm hesitant to give yes, this is what all women or all men or all extroverts or all introverts, but you'd have to do an actual clinical study. I'm not sure what personality traits you're considering. Are you thinking about the DISC personality? Are you thinking about emotional intelligence? Are you thinking about different? I mean, all those studies. I would
all of them, right? Just curious what kind of correlations, but I get it. It's, you're just collecting more and more data.
Well, when I studied emotional intelligence and its correlation with sales performance, you have to give the emotional intelligence test, and then you have to have the sales results to compare, right?
Right.
So you have to do a study like that where they would take curiosity code index and then they could compare it with their sales results and do correlation studies. So it would take research, a lot of time to go through all that. But I think all those studies should be done. The only research that I've had formally peer-reviewed published is how the assessment was created, and that's out there. And it's like Science Daily and all the other magazines, they have it all out there, it's peer reviewed. But what we looked at there was how to create the assessment and how we validated it and all of that. So all the correlation studies, I'm excited to see what they can do.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, that'll be fun. I don't know if I'm going to be doing all of them, but I hope a lot of researchers are.
Well, you're kicking it off. It's very relevant, and I'm sure that there'll be much more coming out in that arena.
I think so. I think it's going to be a hot topic for a long time because innovation's everywhere, everything right now. Everybody's worried about AI taking over jobs. If people are disengaged, we know because of Gallup that less than a third of the workplace is engaged. It's such the worst numbers ever, right? We're losing 500 billion a year. I mean, how many times have we all heard that, right?
Totally right.
If everybody knows these numbers, everybody wants to fix that. We have to look at what would help with engagement. Wouldn't it help if people were aligned to jobs that they really cared about, really liked, were interested in? And how can we do that if we're not even asking people or they're allowing them to explore things? And the thing is, that's the key, because as people are going to be moved, not only many manual labor type jobs, but some of these other higher level jobs, people are going to get displaced. And we know that. So if we could start asking questions, allowing people to explore and find out what they really would rather be doing, maybe they just got this job and they really didn't want to do it and they're just putting up with it. And so I want to use this to help people find what they really are passionate about so that we improve engagement and get them into jobs that are more appropriate.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a key issue that needs to be resolved. I just remembered something that I was thinking about earlier is that I think, based on what I've seen and talking to people, that the fact that people are so busy, right, and leaders are even more working on this disengagement, or they're more engaged in so many different things. Maybe there's fewer resources, and that's why people seem to be busier, or we're just impulsive and distracted, and that's part of what adds to it. But it was making me think that curiosity might be going down, like you said, maybe with technology, but also with the whole distraction and busy and the challenge that people are in with this tug of war with time, that their excuse is, well, we don't have time to ask questions, right? We don't have time to focus on studies and that type of leadership. But do you hear that at all? Or
well, we hear bandwidth. We don't have time to give another test. We don't have time. What if we train people and then they leave? All those kind of questions. What if? Okay, well, what if you don't train them and they stay? What if, and they're not very good? And what if you don't take the time to give, there's the opportunity cost, right? What if you don't take the time to give them the assessment and develop them? What if you don't let people ask the questions? What if you end up being the Blockbusters and Kodaks because of that? And so I think a lot of it is time management skills, of course, and ability that a lot of the things that you help people with to being more efficient and effective and all that needs to be worked on. I think a lot of people don't ask questions. How can I be more efficient? How can I do this a different way? And that it boils down to curiosity again, because I think so. When I was in sales, I remember doing, they had contests. I was super competitive, and they would have these contests where they'd have us dial for dollars, basically. They threw you the phone book and you had to dial for all day long. And then they would track your phone time on their computers of how much time you were spent on the phone. And, in an 8-hour day, they'd like you to do 2 to 4 hours was somewhere in there. And I was always like 4 hours because you had all the other stuff you had to do outside the phone. So you couldn't spend the whole day on the phone.
Right.
no one got more than like 2 hours. And I'd be always like around 4 hours. And they're like, how are you doing this? Because no one else can do it. And it just came naturally to me to type my notes, what I was saying while I was talking to them. Because if I got off the phone and typed later,
right, it takes you twice as long.
But I guess it wasn't intuitive to other people to do that. And I think some things are just not intuitive to people, that they just think, oh, I have to do them separately or it'll seem, or maybe they can't multitask as well.
I think that's a great point, is that things that some people find intuitive, other people do not. And we take that for granted, for sure.
Right. And I know they say don't multitask, but I'm the queen of multitasking, but only when it's things that you can multitask, not like taking a science exam where you can't do anything else but do that. You know what I mean? But if I could type and talk at the same time and it doesn't interrupt, those kinds of things, I multitask all the time. Teach for several universities, and sometimes I'm grading different things all at the same time because I have to wait for the computer.
Right.
Class going around and around. And I'm like, why am I going to wait for that when I could be doing this? Where other people just sit there and stare at the hourglass. I think we have to think, when are you staring at the hourglass when you could do something else?
Absolutely. I definitely think there's a time for multitasking, and it depends on what the tasks are and things like that. But we do know that the studies say that it's not good. So as a productivity person, I do not want to encourage anybody who's listening.
You're going to catch that.
To multitask. Well, great. Thank you so much for being here. I've really enjoyed the conversation around curiosity. And as I said, I think it's just a brilliant concept and basis for everything. So I love it. Where can people find out more information about you and Take the Index?
Well, thank you, first of all, for having me on the show. This was so much fun. I would say the best way to reach me is my website, drdianehamilton.com. You can get directly to it from my site, but you can also go to curiositycode.com to take the index. Either one will get you there. But if you go to drdianehamilton.com, you can also go find the radio show. You can find my consulting and speaking and everything else I do. And the Curiosity is right at the top. You can go right there. Yeah, the book, the Curiosity Code Index, and the certification training is there. If they do the certification training, they get 5 hours of SHRM recertification. So that's nice for anybody trying to get their HR credits in.
Great.
Yeah, it's just everything is available there. And you can find me on social media at Dr. Diane Hamilton, everywhere.
Fantastic.
Thanks.
Well, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me on the show.
Pleasure. And thank you all for being here. You were curious and it paid off. So continue practicing being curious and go check out Dr. Diane Hamilton's content. It's amazing, and it's definitely going to open your mind and change your behavior and improve your performance. So thank you all. My name is Penny Zenker, and this is Take Back Time.
Thank you for listening. Today's topic is another opportunity for you to put the knowledge you learned into practice. Tune in again next week for more strategies that will help you have more energy and focus to get more done in less time, so you can continue to take back time.